You know, friends, sometime we get a jolt to our thinking. Something happens within with the force of an explosion. A new thought enters our thinking. We wrestle with it. We wonder, can it be? A thought runs through our mind. Am I thinking right? Am I hearing right? I said that to say this. Some time ago, a great, new, powerful thought was thrust into my mind. It was like God himself was speaking to me. It was God. And these words were these: expect a new miracle every day. I had the same reaction that most everyone else would. How can this be? Is this possible? You know, the day that Jesus fed the multitude, the 5,000 with the loaves and fishes of one little boy, he was confronted with the same question: how can this be? When the day was spent, night was drawing on, and the disciples came to Christ and said, send the multitude away that they might buy food for themselves. Jesus literally astounded them. He looked at these men and said, give ye them to eat. How in the world can we give them to eat? They replied, in essence, seeing that there isn't any food in this crowd except, as far as we know, one little boy with his lunch. Now, how can we take a boy's lunch and feed 5,000 men, not counting the women and the children? And if people went to church in those days like they do now, if they had 5,000 men, there must have been 10,000 women and at least 5,000 children. Must have been a 20,000 people crowd. And they said, how can we do this? Well, they were looking at the human. They were living in their limitation. The reaches of their mind had been constricted and narrowed to their ability, to the supply they could see with their eyes and feel with their hands. But Jesus was outside of their limitation. He was above the narrow confines of man's way of thinking and believing. He said, give ye them to eat. And this has always been his charge to his people, to feed a hungry world. You know, Gandhi, before he died, said this: not even God would dare to come to a hungry man except in the form of his need. And when we look at the critical need of humanity today, dare we not believe that God will come to us in the form of a miracle? Isn't it a miracle that we need? Do we not need to stretch our minds, to lift up our eyes to the hills from whence cometh our help? I remember when I was in Hong Kong several years ago and was being driven outside the city over the countryside, that I was struck almost with the force of a physical blow when I saw those Chinese women, hundreds of them, out in the rice paddies and fields working. They seemed never to raise their heads. And when they crossed a road, usually in single file, they had their heads down. Everybody had their head down. And I wondered, how in this world can God come into the thinking of people who have their heads down, who never look up into the brightness of the sun, in whose soul the angels do not sing, and the shout of a king is not heard in their ears? How can we, in this world of terrible need and hunger, find deliverance unless we start thinking in a different way? Sure, we're to do what we can do. God puts a premium upon man's ability. He does not insult our intelligence and try to make us feel that we're not to use our minds to bring forth new creations or our hands to bring forth new inventions. God expects us to do what we can do, and he helps those best who helps themselves. But once we reach the end, when our limitation crowds around us and we simply are hedged in from every side, what then? Does God leave us to our limitation? Are we there in the gathering shadows of the coming night to go away with our stomachs hungry and our minds reaching forth for answers? No. God says, give ye them to eat. Expect a miracle. When he looked at these disciples who told him that there was only one little lad with a small lunch in his hands and doubted the ability to bring forth enough food to feed 5,000 men, Christ did, well, he did the thing that he wants us all to do. He looked up. He thanked God. He took the little lunch in his hands and he began to break it. And he handed it and he began to multiply. He gave this man a handful and this man a handful and this man a handful. He gave 12 men a supply. And they kept going out and coming back and going out and coming back, and pretty soon the crowd had filled their stomachs, and they all came back, these 12 men, with 12 baskets. A basket full for every man who doubted it could be done. Here's the explosion of an idea that we can expect a miracle. In the area of our limitation, we can expect a miracle. In the area of where we can supply our own needs, we don't expect miracles. That means that we do then what we can do. In the area of our limitation, Christ has told us to expect miracles. And the thought he thrust upon my mind is, expect a new miracle every day. A man who believes what I'm talking about and tries to practice it was to board a plane. He was expecting God to give miracles in his life that day, and he had the impulse, don't go on this flight. He canceled out. He had to rearrange his schedule. That evening, that plane crashed. When he told me how God had intervened in his life, there was a shine on his face and a sparkle in his eye. You see, he had touched a miracle. A woman in our prayer line wanted me to do something special. She wanted me to touch her shoulder. I usually touch people here on the forehead. When I stood in her presence, I felt my hand gravitating to her shoulder. How? I don't know. That was her point of contact, and God healed her. How did I know? Miracles. Maybe it doesn't sound like a miracle to some, but it's a miracle to us. Expect a new miracle.